is a woman from Germany who was took part in this first ritual. She said Robert Prevost took part in the ritual killing of a girl who was pregnant. The Pope, John Paul II, and Karol Wojtyła cut open the woman's stomach and pulled out the fetus. They chopped it up, ate the body, and drank the blood. You see, it's based on the Catholic Mass, where it's believed the blood of the innocent it will redeem you. And when Prevost took his ordination as a priest, he also took a vow of loyalty to the Ninth Circle at the same time. That's how the ritual works. And another eyewitness described that at that same ceremony, where she also was present, there was this, it's been all over the news, a woman called Emanuela Orlandi, a young girl, disappeared when she was 15. She disappeared in Rome. The day she disappeared, according to the second eyewitness, she appeared at this Ninth Circle ceremony. And they didn't kill her, but they inducted her with torture, where they all have to participate in the killing of a child, often a newborn, and then cannibalizing it. It's part of the ritual. And this is a picture of Emanuela as a young girl in front of Karol Wojtyła, the same Pope John Paul II. So it's very organized early on, whereby they either kill the child or induct them into the cult. They claim that Emanuela was then trained to work with the cult, entrapping politicians sexually, being a sleeper assassin. It's a part of the, again, there's a lot of overlap with the MK Ultra and what CIA and other agencies do in terms of using people. So anyway, that's some of that early testimony. Keep scrolling down.
For people that are new to the Ninth Circle cult, could you give just a little bit of background on what that is? You mentioned it went back 400 years, which is pretty fascinating.
Well, it's interesting because we've even found a log that was slipped to us by a Vatican librarian, which purports to have a list of all of the Ninth Circle rituals that have gone on since 1869 with a list of all our participants. That's how we know another reason, besides the eyewitness, we know that Robert Prevost took part in these ceremonies. But officially, the Jesuits set it up in the 1500s, as like I mentioned, but it actually is a lot older because it's based on a Roman cult ritual. The name Ninth Circle actually is a translation from Latin, nonus perfidia. And what that means is the ninth betrayal. So the Ninth Circle refers to the 9 levels of hell described in Dante's poem, The Inferno, where it's believed that at the 9th level of hell is Satan, along with the souls of people who betrayed a sacred trust in life, like the trust of a child. And it's also called the 9th betrayal because as you go down through different levels of hell, you increasingly betray the things that make us human. Love, compassion, integrity, the life of children, all of that. And basically these participants believe that if you do these rituals and sacrifice yourself as well as these children, you'll gain a lot of power, and including power over people. But it's also a cover because don't forget, in a lot of the military experiments that we've, been well documented over the decades, one of the ways they brainwash people is they put in post-hypnotic suggestions that, no, you weren't being used by military, you were part of a satanic ritual. And so you make it very distant, like it has nothing to do with the present, with the present government or the churches or anything, to fog what's really going on. And so the same thing went on here. So when people talk about being in a satanic cult, you have to also say, okay, yes, it has that practice and appearance, but it's also a lot more than that. And we know later in the report, it describes how Donald Trump was not only involved at a child sex orgy party at Jeffrey Epstein's apartment in Manhattan in the spring of 1999. And they identified his bodyguards and other people who we know work with him. But he also was involved in the death of several bankers, Vatican Bank officials with Deutsche Bank, which were involved in providing secret unauthorized loans to Trump International. And these guys conveniently die, as did other witnesses who we'll talk about. So, and he was seen at these cult rituals, okay? So when you're in that echelon of power, everyone's involved to some degree, or everyone knows about it. So that's why we call it a systemic crime. It isn't just a bunch of weirdos who you can lock up. I mean, it's right embedded in the system, like child trafficking is, through the government, social work system and all that, as we know. So anyway, that's a little bit of background on Ninth Circle.
Thank you for that. And you're absolutely right. You hear that time and time again that obviously the satanic ritual abuse, the Satanism, the satanic cult aspect of all this, it does play a big part, especially when you're looking at sort of the ancient mystery religions, black magic. There's a lot of different things that they pull from that layer of it, but it is a layer that is on top of the government. That's the part that they hope that you stop at is the satanic ritual abuse, the Satanism, the satanic cult, because underneath that implicates a lot of people, and that's kind of the deepest layer. And so I appreciate you shining a light on that, because it does. It goes deeper than any of us can imagine, and gets even worse than, what we can imagine. But a lot of people do stop there, and I think that's where sometimes these conspiratorial aspects come up because there's not the connection to the deeper layers.
Right, and I mean, don't forget, conspiracy is an illegal term. It's
Yes.
three or more people planning to do a crime,
Yep.
and so this is definitely at work here. So let's go down a little bit more on that. If you go down to the just below that picture, you'll see a picture of Emanuela Orlandi. Yeah, scomparsa means disappeared in Italian, and there's posters like this all over Rome still. The church put out the story, oh, she just vanished, we don't know where she is. No, in fact, she's still probably alive, being used in the Ninth Circle rituals. As a matter of fact, we've actually put out a call across Europe for anyone who knows her whereabouts, because she's one of many that are used in this system. But if we go down a little bit more, right beneath that picture, there's another witness, and she was from Essen, Germany. She took part in the ceremonies, and she was taken to Buckingham Palace. And under Buckingham Palace, she described a militarized basement compound where she observed rows of children in cages, including those with wires protruding. Her eyes were so cruel, I think it was then that Charles and Andrew raped me over and over. Later, when they had me in the cage, I saw Andrew drag a young girl out of a cage and stab her to death with a long knife. Now, that mentioning of butterfly, if you remember the early phase of the MK Ultra experiments in the 1950s, they also called it the Monarch Butterfly Project, because part of the programming is you tell the victim that they're going to transform, like, from a pupa, from a worm, a pupa, into a different creature, from a caterpillar into a butterfly, right? So the idea that they're wiped clean and made into a new creature. And that's really at the heart of really what's really being aimed at the whole population now, is you're erasing a former personality and you're creating a new one that's integrated into a massive machine complex. So you have no more individuality. And I think of that every time I ride on the bus, and every single young person is like that with their iPad, and they never look up, and they never take it and put it away in a bag. They're always holding it close to them, right? I mean, it's part of the thing that Ninth Circle and MK Ultra was all about, using electrical energy weaponry to control the frequency of the human brain. So there is no more dissent. There is no more difference. It's all controlled. They found that electricity does that far more effectively than chemicals, or the earlier physical, kind of crude physical methods of mind control, like lobotomies in that way, which just destroyed the human brain. This modulates everybody on the same frequency. And that was one of the research aims of a lot of the programs connected to the Ninth Circle and these other agencies we've talked about, right?
Yeah, that's horrifying what you read, and very, very telling, and does have that essence of MK Ultra, along with, the cult side of it, and even being subjected to electric shocks. That's very synonymous with survivor testimonies, as
Yeah.
and just these horrible, horrible sacrifices and deaths that they make these children, these participants, they force them to watch and or partake in. And that's really horrifying what this woman saw, and really wonderful that you're able to shine a light on it and give her story a voice. We need more of this to come out. And, a lot of people that we don't want to be involved with this stuff are. And so I'm really happy that people are naming names. And I think this one will shock a lot of people to, a lot of people idolize Trump to a degree, whether that's actual idolizing or, just really having hope that this man is going to change things for us, and it's really sad that there's a lot more witnesses coming forward and survivors and victims that are saying a lot of these same things, that they've been so scared to come forward, but that it's time now, and
Right.
it's incredible that you were able to get some witness
Well,
testimony as well.
the very fact that people look to a father figure or a leader figure to lead them to some imagined utopia, that's part of the programming right there. The thing about sovereignty and self-governance, we don't need leaders, especially, oligarchic billionaires who tell them, who's lived their whole lives for themselves. Why would they suddenly be interested in humanity? I mean, it's part of the fact that we're already pre-adapted to be slaves. But the thing about Trump is that, in the report, now, this is not just eyewitnesses who were there. I mentioned the 5 witnesses who are survivors of it. The other 5 are people like, there's an Interpol officer who's still at work, who's been accumulating this stuff for years on the side, unofficially. There's a member of the Italian government, a retired member of the Vatican Bank, and other people who witness these things personally. And one of the things, this picture of Epstein and Trump, it was taken just before an incident where witness B, as we describe her, was taken to a child sex orgy at Epstein's apartment in Manhattan. And there she saw, let me just go up a bit. Okay. She was flown to New York City, used in a sadomasochistic sex orgy involving children at Epstein's high-rise apartment. She says that among the participants in the orgy was Donald Trump. She states that in one of the rooms, which looked like a studio, a snuff film was made in which an Asian girl about 5 years old was raped and tortured to death. Witness B was forced to watch the killing by one of the men who had accompanied Trump to the orgy. Quote, he seemed to be like a bodyguard. He was a very evil-looking man who was armed. Trump called him Keith. Now, if you go right to the bottom of the, you'll see in the footnotes, footnote number 2, there's a picture. So go right to the very bottom of the article. Yep. There, go up. There he is. Footnote 2. The Keith who accompanied Donald Trump to this child sex orgy is, in all probability, Keith Schiller, the man below, chief security advisor and bodyguard to Trump and former director of Oval Office operations. At the time of the incident described by witness P, Schiller had just been hired by Trump as his chief bodyguard after he had worked as a Manhattan cop. Schiller was named by Stormy Daniels in her court case as a disgusting pimp for Donald during the lawsuit brought against Trump by Daniels. Now, more on what Trump's implication in this. If you go back up to that picture of him and Epstein, they've had a long relationship. And in fact, there was a woman, Virginia Gifford, who worked at Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence as a spa attendant, and she was raped there by Epstein, according to Second Circuit Court of Appeals documents filed in 2008. Now, Virginia Gifford was an eyewitness, but she died this year on April 24th, alleged suicide, even though she was right in the midst of custody battle for one of her children. Not a normal time where you would kill yourself. She claimed that her linking of Trump with the raping and trafficking of children was stricken from court records. And don't forget, Trump recently stopped the release of the Epstein files because he's implicated. He naturally didn't want that stuff coming out. But it goes beyond him as an individual because, you see, Trump International has been laundering money through its bank associates for the Mexican drug cartels for many years. The drug cartels are involved in human trafficking. So this whole big push about hysteria about immigration and deporting people, the thing to realize is that it's an aspect of the human trafficking industry. People often aren't deported. They're stuck in the private prison industry that he personally profits from. Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi is a former lobbyist for the private prison company, GEO. So these people are making money off all the immigrants, because don't forget, they separated the children. Remember the controversy about he insisted on the children of immigrants be separated in a separate prison away from their own families? Well, that's because they can be trafficked more easily that way. And it's all tied into the, again, these ninth circle activities. And so we're talking about big money, in other words. It isn't just about a bunch of weirdos. It's tied in, which they are, of course, but it's tied into big money, big politics. And so more on that. I just want to touch on some of these other witnesses. There's a map. If you look, scroll down a little bit. One witness C is an insider with the Vatican. He provided this schematic map of where this ninth circle ritual occurs in the basement. It's actually right under St. Peter's Square, under this obelisk in the middle, which I think is an energy reversal thing. It's right above. If you look on the map, there's a section U, and that's called the Tomb of Lucifer. It's where all the ninth circle ceremonies take place. And what's interesting about it is that it's and there's a colored map beneath it with a close-up. It's pre-Constantinian, which means it's from Roman times. It's very ancient. And it's exactly where you see the purple area and Tomb U. That's from Roman times. That's before the church was even invented. These are Roman. This was an early Roman ritual where you take children and animals and sacrifice them certain times of the year for the crops or whatever, right? So these are ancient Roman practices adapted into Catholicism and the modern era. And some of the people in Rome, if you believe them, they say that this is a gateway to hell. That's what they referred to as. It's kind of like a dimensional portal where a lot of bad energy comes through. And it's fed literally by the blood of the innocent that they sacrificed in that Tomb U.
Wow, that's pretty neat. You're able to get some of these graphics. I've had, as I was looking at this, I had a survivor on my show who testifies that she was abused at the Vatican talk about, and she was a child, of course, remembering, but she was saying there's a giant chair in the ritual room that Satan sits on during one of the child initiation rituals. And she said that he looked huge, but you think about coming from the eyes of a child. I don't know how big the person might have been. She might not either, but I almost got chills. I felt my hair stand up whenever I saw this chair here, because I've actually heard that exists in one of these Vatican spaces.
Right. Well, I mean, there's all aspects of their testimony I haven't touched on. Frankly, it's kind of so disgusting, it's hard to describe. But it has to do with the destruction of innocence and getting people to destroy their own innocence. For example, they all have to participate in the killing of babies, and if they don't, they're killed right away. So the survivors are all implicated. That's often why people don't come forward, because they themselves have done the killings, right? So it's hard to, you don't want to think about it, you don't want to admit it because of what might happen to you. But the court has given amnesty to people who do come forward and describe, so they know they're not going to be prosecuted for that in return for their testimony. And that applies to any official at the Vatican. Anyone is granted amnesty by the court for their testimony. So that's helped people come forward, right? But some of these other witnesses, like, let me just touch on that. And I just want to say, like I mentioned, I've talked to all 5 of these witnesses. We've done Zoom calls with the special prosecutor. And I know, having worked with survivors for many years, you can tell in someone's eyes,
Yes.
They're not looking shifty-eyed. You can tell the emptiness, the horror, the despair in their eyes, that this is real. These things are very real. And, so the other witnesses who weren't victims, but who were part of it, one of them was working with the support group around the Ninth Circle. So he sets up safe houses. He buys off the police. He gets rid of the remains, that kind of thing. One of these people has come forward as well. And interestingly, he mentioned the whole pharmaceutical connection, in that he had met with a research scientist for Pfizer who was involved in using children in drug testing protocols, including, the nanoprobe experiments and things like that have been done to perfected COVID shots and all that stuff. He said that the CEO of Pfizer, a guy called Albert Bourla, is personally acquainted with the fact that children are used and killed in these experiments. He's approved it. He's also approved, because they're closely connected to the research facility in China at Wuhan. Pfizer knows that a lot of the people used in these drug testing experiments are political prisoners in China, that are just brought out and used and killed. These guys know all about it, and they approved it, and they're, so I mean, the web of complicity goes a lot further than just the church and the government, right? It involves a lot of these, and it's the amazing thing is how institutionalized it is. When you first start looking at child trafficking or something, you realize, well, these people wouldn't have done these things unless they knew they were protected, right? And there's that whole infrastructure backing it, which makes it at first impenetrable. You can't really see it going on unless you get an insider to come forward, and that's what's begun to happen. So that's the power of this court case, right?
Incredible.
So, a final thing I want to mention, because I talked about it earlier, Witness G, he's an employee of the Vatican Bank who was a liaison officer with the Deutsche Bank, one of the Vatican Bank's chief partners. Now, this witness has personal knowledge of the murder of 2 Deutsche Bank officers, and their pictures are in the, if you go down a bit at point 7, just below that. The 2 Deutsche Bank officers murdered were Thomas Bowers and Valentin Brockschmidt, and they were killed by that guy, the first guy at the top. His name's Domenico Gianni. He's the head of Santa Alianza. The guy above that picture, right, that's him. Santa Alianza, it's called the Holy Alliance. That's the name for the Vatican Assassination Bureau. And they're the ones who killed John Paul I. They probably have been the ones who killed some of our witnesses. I suspect that when I was poisoned in the summer of 2021, they had a hand in it because it had all the earmarks, and so this guy put out a hit on the people below him. That first one, Valentin Brockschmidt. Let me just describe these guys. Brockschmidt had provided FBI investigators with hundreds of documents about the connection between loans to Donald Trump from Deutsche Bank and his secret Russian and Vatican investors. He gave the FBI hundreds of documents about that, but then he was found dead in April 2022. The other man, Thomas Bowers, who's below that in a picture right next to Trump. Bowers was a close friend of Trump and Epstein, who was found dead in Malibu in November 2019, just a few days before the story of his relationship with Trump and the bank loans went public. And according to Witness G, quote, Deutsche Bank has heavily underwritten the criminal operations of the church for many years. It's laundered billions of dollars for the Vatican mob and its Vatican and its mob associates, and for Trump International and its Mexican drug cartel partners. Bowers was about to start talking to the feds about what he knew. Subsequently, I learned that both Bowers and Brockschmidt had been killed by Santa Alianza assassins, as ordered by Domenico Gianni, who was a sworn agent of both Pope Francis and Pope Leo. So, I mean, that's, well, on a final note, right at the very bottom, there's a picture of one of the places this, right there, if you go up a bit, right, that's a guy called Philip Boselager. He's a member of the Ninth Circle. He looks fairly creepy.
Yeah.
Several of the witnesses knew this guy. The Boselager estate is near a place in Paderborn, Germany. And it's a place where he's an ex-Nazi officer. On his estate, a lot of these killings happened. One of the German witnesses, this older woman, said that as a child, after she was inducted into the cult, her sister had been tortured to death in front of her. Then she was used in the cult, taken to the Boselager estate here, and they had her in a room where she helped. There were all these children in cages, and they were removing blood from them. Lots of blood taken out all the time. They basically bled them to death, and they said the blood was being used by pharmaceutical companies and the military for experiments. That's all she was ever told. But it took place right in this Boselager estate. And this guy was an active participant. He knew a bunch of these cardinals in the area, Catholic cardinals who were part of it. And I mentioned that there were a number of local Catholic cardinals who were protecting the Bosalegre estate, who were providing children who were personally involved in the rituals. And I talked about their connection to Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop. He's now the Archbishop of New York, a close personal friend of Trump's, a participant in the Ninth Circle, and the one that Trump wanted in as Pope. He was really pushing to have Dolan nominated. Instead, Robert Prevost got it. We haven't talked about Prevost much, so I do want to mention some things about him.
Yeah.
Some more things that have come up, because I wanted to show the whole context, and then we'll talk specifically about Prevost. Although before that, you said you knew somebody who knew about Timothy Dolan, and you might have some info to share about that.
So I definitely want to introduce you to my friend Chris. I've had him on my podcast. He is from St. Louis, grew up in St. Louis, and had experiences with Cardinal Dolan while he was at a lower level here in St. Louis, sort of getting his start. And this was many, many years ago, a few decades ago, when he was in school. Cardinal Dolan helped the cover up of his Catholic school abuse, where he believes that he may have been programmed, but went through extreme sexual abuse in these churches out here, these Catholic schools. And Dolan worked there, oversaw the staff before he moved up to be cardinal and obviously archbishop now. But the survivor shares how, Dolan, one of the reasons why he was abused and continued to be was because Cardinal Dolan helped the church cover it up. And there were many children, he was one that he's been testifying, and they're still covering it up out here, and he's older now. And so it's really interesting. I'll have that interview linked and I'll send it to you, Kevin.
Okay. Great.
But yeah,
well,
it's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing to understand is that in a way they don't have to cover up, because the law allows them to do whatever they want. The church is a law unto itself. They have a policy that says when children are raped by priests, no one is to tell the police. I mean, that's a criminal conspiracy right there. They shouldn't be allowed to do that under the law, but they're not under the law. And the fact that they've been operating in this child killing machine for so many centuries is more proof of that, right? So but that's why we always talk about crimes of church and state, because it's really one beast, and with a lot of money behind it. On the other hand, they're very vulnerable because there's so many witnesses to this. And the difficulty is getting people to realize that they can act on this. And we can talk a little bit about that. But let me just end by talking about more of the evidence about Prevost, the present so-called Pope. Thing to understand about him is that he may have been born in America, but he's really the second Latin American Pope. He's carrying on the work that Bergoglio did before him, which was financially to allow China to penetrate the Western Hemisphere. Bergoglio did that in North America. The reason Prevost got in to be an archbishop and then cardinal quite recently was because he greased the wheels of Chinese penetration of South America to grab their minerals and resources. There was a thing in the news just a couple of weeks ago about how China just opened the largest port on the West Coast in Peru, a $1.5 billion port with Vatican Bank money and the Peruvian government. And a lot of the minerals are now being shipped out of there. A lot of illegal Chinese immigrants brought in, just like on the west coast of Canada. And that was why he was put in, to carry on that kind of Chinese takeover, to underwrite it with Vatican money. But at a more basic level, he's a long time, since the age of 21, he's been a member of the Ninth Circle. And, there's constant stuff in the news about him covering up, the activity of child rapists in his diocese of Chiclayo in Peru. One of the reasons he got in, as well as he had close ties with the military, with the drug cartels. If you remember Pablo Escobar, the Colombian drug lord, he regularly invited Prevost to all his parties, right? Because Peru is right next door to Colombia, right? And this guy was in with the military, with the drug trafficking, the child trafficking from early on, and of course the Ninth Circle. So he was an ideal candidate, for in a number of ways to keep the this whole murderous machine going, right?
Wow. Oh my goodness. And with the Pope Leo case, how many witnesses have you had come forward about his abuse or survivors?
Of the five witnesses, two of them were personally raped by him. Things like during the Ninth Circle ceremonies, they take the bodies and the blood of the little baby or fetus that they've chopped up, force it into the mouth, like a communion ritual. You know, they force it into the mouth and into the vagina of these young girls, and torture them and beat them and do all sorts of other things to them. And two of them that they saw him. They've identified him positively from pictures. They've described more information about him that we can't release because it's involving other witnesses who we're still interviewing. But it'll all come out. Like I say, September 1st, the court is going to convene. Summonses are going to be issued against him and a lot of his accomplices. And, we have the power of enforcement. Now, more people, more police forces, people on our side to help, not only enforce it, but stop these things, right? Because that's the purpose of this whole thing. To me, it's not just horrible information. It's a way for people to take action to stop these things happening in your own neighborhood. Wherever you live, it's likely going on because it's happening throughout the whole Catholic network all over the world.
Yes. And going back real quick to the other survivor that I had just talked about, Chris O'Leary, who talked about his abuse by Father Valentine here at Immaculata Church in St. Louis. One of the things that he was convinced of, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. After what he went through and watching Cardinal Dolan climb the ranks, he believes that that's how you get into these positions is by helping and proving how you can not just abuse, but keep secrets and allow the abuse to continue underneath you. And he believes that that's how these popes and these archbishops and cardinals get into their positions is they excel in helping keep the secrets of these cults.
Well, that's right. And don't forget these ceremonies are all filmed. That's another aspect. One of the people, the insiders, confirmed that it's all filmed because they sell it as snuff films. They make a lot of money selling the ritual killing and ripping apart of children as a snuff film within the Catholic Church and other circles. And it's like in any hierarchy, that it's like you're put through a series of tests, and people with integrity and honesty and humanity are weeded out very quickly. Like what happened to me in the United Church. I remember that story of a woman who at one of the first forums we ever held in Vancouver on the residential schools, on those death camps, a white woman stood up and said, I worked in the Alberni school. I stopped a little girl from getting killed because a matron was beating her to death with a piano leg. But I was fired rather than the woman killing the child because the woman who was trying to kill the child played the organ in church on Sunday, so they couldn't lose her, right? So it shows you the mentality. If you serve the machine, you're in. And if you object, if you have inhumanity, you're forced out. So that means that the people left all have an interest in keeping the secret, keeping it quiet. And they know they're on film. They know they're implicated personally. Why would they talk? If they shut up and go along, they're going to be rewarded. And they get to wear white robes and look saintly when they've got the blood of children on their hands. I mean, it almost is a metaphor for the hypocrisy of our whole culture, right? And I think that's why when you ask people to get involved in stopping these things, there's an automatic aversion to doing it because of the level of fear. They think, well, what's going to happen if we take on the church? I mean, aren't we going to get in trouble? Not, they're killing children. We have to stop it, right? I mean, it's hard proof again that this stuff is going on. So that's why you have to lead by example in this. And that's why I like talking about what we were able to achieve in Canada, because we showed that it's possible to stop these things and bring out the truth and save lives, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And, getting to see sort of how this web works too, you had summarized in the beginning, government, big pharma is involved with this. Obviously, you have names too, but I'd love for you to share a couple of the other people involved in this and kind of, you mentioned the CEO of Pfizer. Um, I'd love to hear how some of these other aspects, how big pharma's tied into this and, their kind of their part in partaking in these types of abuses to show people how spread out this network is.
Yeah, well, I did mention Mr. Borla. He's head of the CEO of Pfizer, and he personally approved the use of children and prisoners in the drug testing, even though there's a picture of him if you scroll down a bit. He looks very creepy. But there's not only Pfizer, but all the big pharma companies like GlaxoSmithKline, Eli Lilly, Novartis. They were all working for many decades with the churches. They had agreements. I know in America there's a thing called the Fund for Theological Education. A lot of Eli Lilly started it, but Big Pharma all contribute. They fund the theological colleges where they train clergy. In return, the church provides children out of their orphanages, their hospitals, and that for drug testing and for other things. And it's well known. I've heard people in government make reference to it, kind of obliquely. But the fact is that they are up to their eyebrows in these crimes, the pharmaceutical companies, because it helped them develop these nanoserums and these other things that are being used as part of the bigger corporate agenda of controlling the whole world's population. And so, yeah, they are just as guilty as all these other actors. We mentioned the banks, the Dutch, Belgian, and British royal families, all of their members seen at these rituals. Again, one of the witnesses from Germany described, like the other witnesses who came forward in the past, like Toos Nieuwenhuis from Holland, taken to Carnarvon Castle in Wales, where Andrew, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, they were all the present so-called King of England, all of these ceremonies where children are ritually killed. So in a way, when you're operating at that level, it's almost a question of who isn't involved, right? Because you just keep, you realize that that's how a hierarchy operates. You have to keep everyone implicated so that they protect each other. And that's often the way it works, right?
Absolutely. And, seeing these different people also that were witnessed being at these rituals too, it really just goes to show how the people that we look at to protect us are the ones causing the most harm behind the scenes. And then publicly they wear this facade that they're these very saintly, good, Christian, wholesome, Catholic, whatever it is, they present one way to the public and the public cheers for them, whether it's idolization or just admiration, they really put on the show publicly. And then it is just so hard for people to wrap their mind around what goes on privately, to see this, archbishop, this pope that are trying to be charitable, on TV, and they're presenting one way, and then behind the scenes to hear what these witnesses say, it is just devastating.
Well, don't forget that a lot of people don't have those illusions about the church anymore. Very few people, of any intelligence go to church anymore, right? Anyone who knows anything about the history of these groups can't deny that this stuff goes on. There's a quote at the start of that article. I put in that quote. We all know that quote, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. People don't realize that was in reference to the Vatican. A guy called John Acton, he was in the British House of Lords, and he was referring to when the Vatican declared that the Pope was infallible, like incapable of error, like he's God or something. He said, I cannot accept your canon that we are to judge Pope and King unlike other men, with a favorable presumption that they can do no wrong. If there's any presumption, it is the other way, against holders of power, increasing as the power increases. There is no worse evil than when the office sanctifies the holder of it. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So as soon as you set anyone up as unaccountable, it's a breeding ground for corruption, because they know they can get away with anything. And that's true not about these so-called popes and kings, who, when you think about it, are just absurd. They're clowns walking around with crowns on their heads, right? And, so what? But at any level of power, it all operates that way. And I know my brother and mother, my mother's dead now, but my brother and her were involved in the business world in Vancouver. And they would come home and describe what went on, like how a government cabinet minister would show up for his check. He said, any legislation you want, Just write me a check, $10,000, it's yours. And Bill, my brother, would say, there's the way the world operates and then the way everybody thinks it operates, right? About elections and accountability and, all this. And it's all about money. And he was kind of contemptuous of me that I still had, some belief in humanity, But the point is that at that level of power, anything is permissible. And the bigger the crime, the more you have to look saintly, right? I mean, that just goes, why would a guy have to walk around in a white robe all the time? Why don't you see a pope in sneakers and T-shirts, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's because part of the programming, and to even compare yourself to God should be to any Christian or anyone, should be blasphemy right there, because, I thought it was supposed to be just God and humanity, not intermediaries, right? Like, so that's the big charade of religion, and that's why religion is the best medium for crime, because people are already brainwashed to believe what they're told, but they can hide. The biggest money launderer in the world is the Vatican Bank. The most violent institution in history is the Catholic Church. Just do the body count. So we have to just present those facts to people and deprogram them, and that's part of why we're doing the show today, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you shared about those videos being used on the black market, for selling them to people who have those different fetishes, the snuff films and, the money. But you see also, how implicated could somebody be if they tried to fight against this and now they're on video at a ritual that somebody could leak, on the internet and show,
Hmm.
oh, look what this person's partaking in. You see also the binds that it has on these people who climb up on those levels and partake in this bribery, blackmail, and pedophilia. It's really how everything is run. And it's like the binds that keep everybody in these systems.
I just I remembered a quote from one of these witnesses. It's actually at the start of the article. You're referring to when Robert Prevost was killing the child. He said he was smiling the whole time he was strangling that little boy, like he knew he would get away with it. It was like watching the devil. And one of the things that the same eyewitness saw, they saw Ratzinger, former pope, take gasoline, put it all over the body of a young Jewish girl, Eloise Schwimmer, her name was, burn her alive with gasoline. He liked to do that to Jewish children. Obviously, he was in the Nazi cult, right? And I mean, when you hear about that, how could any human being burn alive a child in front of them? Well, I mean, they're not human, but I often, when somebody in a recent interview said, "Are these people human?" I said, "Well, maybe that isn't the question. Obviously, they're inhuman, but the real question is, are we human? Because what human being will stand by and let this happen to children? You don't worry about your safety. You just do whatever is necessary to save children's lives. Because if you don't save our children, we will have no future as a species. You know, and I think that's one of the reasons they so much assault goes on children, because it so traumatizes the population at a young age that they can't resist tyranny, and that's why it serves every ruler. That's why all these agencies work together, right, to keep us enslaved that way.
Yes, absolutely. And he does have on the website murderbydecree.com. I'll put the interim report in the show notes for you guys, but you guys can actually go through this.
Yeah,
It's online,
please
it's
do.
public. You guys can go check it out. He does list all the names. Any other names in here that you think would be valuable for people to know or that are big parts of this investigation that you're leading?
Well, the ones under named, Robert Prevost, of course, Donald Trump, King Charles, Prince Andrew, Timothy Dolan, Pietro Parolin, he's a senior cardinal in the Vatican who was present, Bernard Marx, Cardinal Munich, Franz Hengsbach and Lorenz Jaeger, also Catholic cardinals in Germany, Jeffrey Epstein, Borla of pharmaceuticals, lots of other people. But those are only the ones that were named initially, as we wanted to release what evidence we could, because a lot of us are in danger, in doing this stuff. And as we learn stuff, we want to get it out there in case it's lost prior to the court case. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And it seems like there's a lot working on your side. You have obviously witnesses that are coming forward. You have researchers and other people who are corroborating and helping connect these dots. You have your
Mhm.
experience in bringing all of this together and pursuing justice. But what challenges do you face? What things could get in your way of doing this? What obstacles do you have?
mostly the people around us, people's unwillingness to help, because this has to involve a lot of people. It isn't just, Kevin's going to rescue you. It isn't about a court case. Okay, so we get a verdict. It has to be enforced by people in the community. That's like, for example, of course, not attending or funding the Catholic Church or these other churches. It means making citizen arrests on these people who we know are harming children. And you just have to scratch the surface and you'll see who these people are. I mean, I get emails all the time. I just got one from a woman in Salt Lake City who named all the child traffickers in the Mormon church, right? And the senior, they call him the prophet, Russell Nelson, seen at these ceremonies. Like we had talked about the Mormon Catholic link, Mormon Vatican link before, but it's everywhere. And people in their own community have to resolve to educate and take action to stop these things. We prove that when you do that, it sends a shockwave through them. They're not at all powerful. They're only powerful because people are quiescent and don't do anything. As soon as we're the sleeping giant, as soon as we start stirring, they start crumbling. We just have to activate a lot more people to do this. And that's why I say to everyone watching this, contact us, learn, but also about how you can set up action in your community. The court is putting out special warrants, which will allow you to grab evidence, take in evidence, make arrests, also reclaim the property. The Catholic Church is a criminally convicted body. So under international law, they've lost the right to their assets and property. That's why Native people often go in and take over Catholic churches and tell them to get out as reparations for the genocide. But also, once you're criminally convicted of human trafficking, money laundering, genocide, as the church has been, they're what's called a transnational criminal organization under the law, and they don't have the right to their own money. The fact that the existing courts won't enforce that is because of the politics and money and all that. But we have the right to do that. Americans know that when the government doesn't act in your interest and to defend your liberties, you have to. So, especially in America, I think people should take that knowledge and act on it, because already to some degree Americans have broken free from that dependency on authority figures, notwithstanding the Trump lovers. Americans know that sovereignty lies in their own hands, and we have the power to be the law and stop these criminals, right?
Absolutely. And sort of piggybacking off my last question, one of the really cool things I think that you're doing is you're getting records from the Vatican archives, Interpol records. Have you faced any challenges in accessing and authenticating any of these sensitive documents? Just because we know how obstructed the government and Vatican has always been with information.
Well, yeah, and we first tried, it's 13 years ago now, in 2012 with the first case we did. We had people who had stuff. Those people disappeared. We never heard from them again. Eventually, others began to come to us. It takes a while, because they're all watching to see, well, let's see if Kevin is alive next year. And he still is. Okay, well, maybe we can trust him. Maybe we can work with him. But it's kind of a long process of trust building, right? And the difference this time is that the political climate has changed. I mean, things are in such an uproar all over the world now that people are feeling their backs are to the wall more, and they have to take action. And part of that is bringing out the truth about this stuff. So I know that that's part of the reason, but it's a constant uphill battle. People dropping away, disappearing literally. And I have to take constant precautions in the work I do, where I live, where I work, just because, realistically, you can only do this for so long until there's a big backlash. And usually the backlash is not the obvious kind where people just get killed, because that'll bring more attention to bear. They create counter narratives, if you know what I mean. Another story to replace the truth. Say, like they did in Canada, they said, oh yes, some children died, but it wasn't deliberate, it was accidental, and here's money and apology, and we're all reconciled and healed now. And it's even more sickening than talking about the original crime in a way, to see the way the perpetrators pat themselves on the back and pretend things are better now, right? And they'll undoubtedly do something like that with this story, right? And that's why occasionally, somebody will step down, somebody will go to jail. They throw a random fish to the crowd, right? Yeah. To make it seem like there's justice being done. But in practice, this machine carries on. And, you know, in the time we've been speaking today, probably another dozen children are being killed somewhere, right, by this system. So we have to always keep that in mind and keep us restless and passionate for justice. And that's something I see lacking these days. People don't have that passion and that disgust with this thing we're in that we have to stop, right?
Right, exactly. And so, on that note, what impact do you hope that this case will have on public awareness and institutional reform? And especially like regarding the Catholic Church and its ties to child trafficking and organized crimes that you advocate for and have for so long?
Well, realistically, a system this evil can't reform itself. It can do window dressing, but it's not going to change its nature. And, you know, Aristotle once wrote that you to understand the action of any system, you have to know its nature, and then you know what it's going to do. What is the nature of this system? It's based on conquest, the crushing of the human spirit, and murder. And you know that doesn't change over the centuries. It just changes its appearance. So instead of reforming it, which is an illusion, or holding it accountable, which is another nice idea, but it never happens, you have to replace it. You know, I say people you need the 3 R's like we're taught in school, not reading, writing, arithmetic, but resistance and replacement. And I'm trying to remember what the third one was. Hold on, but it'll come back to me. But you have
Resilience,
to resist. Pardon me?
resilience,
That's good.
ruthlessness.
Let's use that. Let's use that till memory serves. The point is, you have to resist it, and you have to replace the system, right? And with one based on humanity, and you can't do that in a very large system. And we have to keep these things local. We have to, and that's the whole thrust of our work when we talk about sovereignty, personal, political, spiritual sovereignty, like that green book of mine that is now a big seller. We have to know that we're responsible individually for this. We're not going to look to anybody else. You know, the old saying is, if somebody leads you into the promised land, they can lead you out again. So you have to create your own promised land and create this reality where children are not used as fodder, where anyone who harms a child is dealt with. They don't get you know, a reprieve. And so I think that's really the cure for this is that it's a transformation of the system, not fiddling with the scales on the dragon, so to speak, right?
Right. And based on all of your experiences, Kevin, I mean, we talked about a lot of evidence today, and there's a lot more in that report that we didn't even fully dive into. In your opinion, and based off your experiences, what do you believe is the most critical piece of evidence or testimony in that report that could shift the public or legal perception of all of these allegations for all these witnesses?
Well, any evidence, you know, there's an old saying, if you tell someone something that affirms their view of the world, you don't need to provide evidence. But if you challenge somebody's view of the world, all the evidence in the world won't convince them, because it's about how we view the world. And damning evidence is that log from the Vatican showing the long list in Latin of all the participants in the Ninth Circle. Eyewitnesses who describe, they don't know each other, but they're describing the same thing with the same people. And what happens in practice? Why would Ratzinger step down, first pope in 600 years to resign, right after the Spanish government had communicated with them? Would the same number of children be dying half a century later unless it was deliberate? Because if it was accidental or bad health conditions, they'd fix it, wouldn't they? But it's still happening half a century later. What does that tell you? What does simple common sense tell you? Well, it's a killing machine, right? But no one in Canada has ever commented at any level of the media or academia or anything. They've never commented on the one piece of evidence. They can't look at it because it exposes their whole lie. It says, yeah, this was mass murder, and we're still doing it. And now it's hitting us. It's almost like the machine, the monster we created, is turning on its creator now, on all of us. And I think that's the way to look at that. We just kill the beast and our connection to it and not try to reform it, right?
Right. Are you hoping that this leads to Pope Leo stepping down in the same way that Pope Benedict did?
Well, he's a figurehead, and him stepping down isn't going to change anything.
Right.
And he
Put some
belongs
faith
in
in.
jail. you got to shut down the Vatican. You got to shut down the Church of Rome the way it's constituted. For Catholics, you say leave the church, create your own community church. You don't need to be part of a genocidal, money-grabbing institution. What does that have to do with Jesus Christ anyway, right?
Right.
Oh, I found the 3 R's. I'm sorry. Resist, reclaim, replace. That's kind of like our guide for what we do in this. We resist by defending children. We reclaim our minds and the systems of government to replace the old corrupt system. And I mean, again, it's just common sense, really, when you think about it.
Well, this is great, Kevin. Is there anything else about this case that you wanted to share? Or if witnesses are listening or somebody that could provide information, how do they get a hold of you? How can we get people involved with this?
Well, you can write to me personally, angelfire101@protonmail.com. The prosecutor's email is itccsoffice@protonmail.com. And murderbydecree.com under ITCCS updates is how you keep posted. September 1st, the court convenes. The summonses are going to be issued. It'll be more public at that point. And notwithstanding something happening, because I don't know, we're in new terrain here. Anything could happen. And so, like when we began the first case in 2012, the chief prosecutor there just suddenly one day vanished. No one ever saw him again. So, I mean, there's no guarantee in any of this. You just have to do as much as you can every day and hope that other people pick this up. So what I would say to anyone watching this, it's in your hands. What you do next, how successful you make this thing.